And so these were the main focuses, or the 4 parts that I broke my original work down into. And these were the effects that the dropping oil prices had on the business community, OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, the financial implications that dropping oil prices have had on us, and the financial implications that the dropping oil prices have had abroad. And like I said before, I made these policy initiatives to help maybe figure it out as to how we can help stabilize oil prices. And I also discussed the economic correlations between how good the United States economy is as a whole and how low oil prices are. So as far as the business community, there was a mixed reaction to the drop in oil prices. Most businesses were benefiting from this, the increased consumer confidence. So as more Americans save money from oil, from gas prices, that's the money that they can use to buy new things. The companies that were not in the oil business benefited from lower energy and transportation costs. And the companies that benefited the most and the most directly from this drop was mail companies such as the U.S. Postal Service, UPS, and FedEx. They saved millions of dollars on transportation costs. But the big oil giants and the big oil producers, such as ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Valero, were really hurting from this drop in oil prices. Now they had to cut a lot of their research that they were doing, and a lot of this research, or at least from ExxonMobil, was looking into alternative fuels and cheaper, cleaner ways on how to drill for oil and to use cleaner burning coal. And these also helped them, it also forced them to cut many jobs, many employees from their different sectors and their companies. And so this was a big deal, and this played a big part in a similar or a small economic slowdown in the first quarter of this year. So we're talking about OPEC here. This is kind of like one of their symbols, and this gentleman right here is King Abdullah. He is now dead, but King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. He was the main figure that kind of forced OPEC to make a very important decision that was a huge factor in the sharp drop in oil prices. So OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. It consists of Algeria, Angola, Ecuador, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Kuwait, Nigeria, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Venezuela. But the main leader in oil production and the main financial driver of OPEC is Saudi Arabia. And they decided at their OPEC meeting, their annual OPEC meeting, to maintain the production levels in the face of slowing demand from Europe because of their economic issues, from the United States because of tougher fuel standards on our cars, and quite frankly because people were tired of spending $3.50, $4 a gallon on gas, and so many people bought better fuel efficient cars, some eco cars, even some smart cars. And so that really contributed to the lowering of demand. But he decided to, in an unprecedented move, to keep the production at their normal levels. And so because he did this, other OPEC countries and Russia, who is a giant producer and exporter of oil, and they mainly control the European market, they depended on oil for their basic functionality of their government. And I will talk about later really how much Russia depends on high oil prices. So the financial implications in America, it allowed us to have a strong U.S. currency. The drop in oil did, because as a whole, that drop boosted our economy and boosted our I guess, supremacy on the global economic stage. The drop in prices was similar to a $62 billion stimulus program. But with this stimulus program, the government didn't have to spend a dime on it. And it could have added a 0.5% increase in our GDP. Now, that may seem small, but that is potentially hundreds of millions of, or $1 billion. And then another big bonus to just average Americans was that they could pocket $500 in savings. And this $500 goes a long way. Americans could save it. They could spend it on many things, paying their bills or even getting new things, which also led to a higher consumer confidence. But, and another big part of the bonuses of a sharp drop in oil prices was that other economic sectors who did not use or who did not produce oil, but they rather used it, benefited from these lower prices. But for every pro, there is a con. And so one of the biggest cons was that oil-producing states such as Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and the Dakotas could potentially and have, over the past couple of months, seen a decrease in economic output and productivity in regards to their energy sector. And one of the biggest areas that allowed us to lower demand for oil in the U.S. was the boom of the shale industry and the hydraulic fracking. That has now been cut. It's still there, but it has been cut significantly since the drop in prices. And the oil sector jobs in the U.S. Could be reduced sharply, and they actually have been. Many companies have cut thousands of jobs and many of their oil rigs because it costs more to drill than the profit they'd be making off the oil. And abroad, as I mentioned with Russia earlier, they control most of the European oil market. And their former satellite countries, when Russia was the Soviet Union, depended on them for their oil. But this drop in prices allowed southern European countries such as Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, and Ukraine, allowed them to break or weaken their ties with Russia and allow them to become less dependent on Russia's economy. Countries such as Spain were able to see 1% growth in their GDP with oil prices at $80 to $90 a gallon. But that obviously has dropped a lot farther since then. Italy could see a 0.3% boost in their GDP with a $10 drop from the previous $100 that it was at. And oil importers such as Greece, Ukraine, and Portugal and Italy could also benefit because they do not have to buy as much oil from OPEC or from Russia. But the biggest cons, and the cons are very deep and pervasive on the global stage, world currencies decreased in relation to the dollar. Now, while that seems great for us, that also means that our exports are more expensive. Countries such as Brazil, Canada, Britain, the euro, which is a very important currency, Australia, Japan, Russia, and China saw huge drops in their value in relation to the US dollar. But Russia was hurt the worst as a country because they depended on oil being at least $100 per barrel to meet their basic economic and government expenses. So their economy was at a terrible state where they needed oil to be that high at the very least to meet their government needs. So this drop really hurt them. So these policy initiatives, again, I'm not a legislator, but I tried to sort of make something out of this and say, how can we fix this instability, at least from the U.S. perspective? So I thought that we should have a phased 12-year total 90% reduction in the amount of oil that we purchase from OPEC. So it said that over the first 4 years we would decrease our oil purchases from OPEC by 50%. Next 4 years, 70%. Then 4 years after that, it would decrease and go to 90%. I said that the remaining 10% of the oil that is imported from OPEC should be stockpiled or mixed domestically with the oil that is produced here to sell in domestic and foreign markets. This phased 12-year plan was not only critical to help us adjust to not importing as much from OPEC, but it allowed us 12 years to grow our own oil infrastructure at home, which is one of the biggest reasons why we've continued to have to buy oil from OPEC. Second policy initiative, obviously this probably wouldn't work, but I just tried to roll with the punches and come up with something to prevent artificial inflation in oil prices. And I think that was one of the biggest problems as to why companies and countries became very dependent on oil being so high, being $100 a barrel, $115 a barrel. So I said in the U.S., as far as domestic oil production, we set and this is obviously taking for granted that inflation doesn't rise and that wages are stagnant. But we would place a price cap that would equate to $3 per gallon for domestic gasoline prices. If prices were to inflate past that for whatever reason, and this would also mainly be geared toward if they were artificially inflated during the summer and during different holidays and stuff like that, a 35% windfall profits tax, which is not a gas tax, which would make consumers pay more for gas, but it is more of a income tax on the company, on the oil company that produces the oil. This 35% tax would be added to the first 30-cent increase. And after each 30-cent increase, the tax will increase by 5%. But when if prices were to reach $4 per gallon, artificially especially, then the tax would increase to 75%, and then it would increase 5% for every 30-cent increase beyond that. So I know that's a lot of numbers, but this to me would help limit and severely reduce artificial inflation by companies, and it would limit them to charging what they needed to charge, not an excessive amount to pretty much rob Americans on the highway. And I said that this tax would be capped at 90%, so it wouldn't go to 100% and things like that. But this would just really penalize companies who took advantage of the price fluctuation in the world and in the U.S. And so what I learned through this original work was, again, more about the global economy, how our economy and how Russia's economy and how the Euro's economy really interacted. I learned more about the role of oil in the global economy because I saw it more as just a domestic issue. I learned about the financial impacts of oil prices not just being high, but being low. I automatically thought that, yes, gas prices are low, that's a great thing, but I really learned that it has a different effect on different economies. I learned about the positive impacts as well as the negative impacts on low gas prices in the U.S. economy. And I learned that there is a need to try new policies to help stabilize oil prices in the United States. So now to the good stuff, the final product. This is really, this is the pride and joy of most ISM students. This is the biggest part of my ISM journey. So I really had a hard time searching and thinking about what I wanted to do for a final product. But as I was talking with my mentor when I met with him one time, I really learned that global finance and the global economy is a very big place. And it would be important to have sort of a map to navigate that place. And so what I came up with and what we came up with together, and this really helps me understand what he does as a person, as the core business leader of Ernst & Young, this map is called professional services. Now, next I will show you what a professional service is. So in regards to global finance, a professional service is not making an Apple computer and selling it to a company. It's not making a desk or a chair and selling it to a company. But professional service is selling knowledge, and research and analysis on profits and marketability, as I talked about before. And part of my final product would be selling the research and the knowledge about mergers and acquisitions and tax audits. These services are really the jobs of the future, and that's exactly what Ernst & Young does as a company. So my final product consisted of a professional services agreement with Southwest Airlines. It's split into 8 phases, and these phases represent the actual steps of what a professional services agreement does. So it wasn't just something that allowed me to, make it easier for me to do the project. It was something that really shows point A, B, C, D, E, F, and G of how companies such as Ernst & Young come together and make these agreements with their clients. So these were split down into 8 phases. These are the first 4. The first phase was the marketing and determination of the market for these services. And so what I found was that, obviously in the recent news, you saw that Malaysia was having a lot of plane crashes. And so what I was able to see was that the citizens of Malaysia probably have a market and a demand for a safe and transparent airline company that is different from Malaysian Airlines. And so determining your market and marketing what you sell or your services is very important to professional services companies. Phase 2 was the actual research and the contacting of potential buyers. So you have to figure out, okay, which company fits what we're trying to sell. Which company is willing to go over there, which company has the capital to go over to Malaysia, which company has the ability to expand into Malaysia. And we were able to figure out that that company Southwest Airlines would be the ideal fit. Phase 3 was the actual contract. We have an actual contract example of an agreement between 2 companies. It outlines the tasks that Ernst & Young would be doing for Southwest Airlines, and it also has the terms of payment because everybody loves to get paid, and that's the biggest part of a contract. Phase 4 was the actual execution plan of how we're going to do these services and the tasks that each team, and it would be divided into teams based on the tasks, which tasks they're supposed to do. And this isn't for Southwest Airlines to understand what we're doing. This is for the team. So this adds a layer of accountability to the team as to what you're supposed to be doing, but also adds a reference point to the team. So when they say, what are we supposed to do with this deadline, or how are we supposed to do this? It is put in, and that's the reason why I put this execution plan in a PowerPoint instead of kind of in a document contract form. It allows them to reference to say, oh, I remember we're supposed to do this and we're supposed to do that. So I kind of combined phase 5 and 6 together. Obviously, we would not have enough time to actually do a merger and acquisition or to file taxes in Malaysia, because these service agreements go on for 1, 2, 3, even 4 years sometimes. But what we did was we talked about how, as a team leader, I would assess what my team's doing. And so this was learned through a process called RAG. Red, amber, and green. So when the status is red, that means that the team is not fulfilling their responsibilities, there's an error in what they're doing, or they're just not on time with the timeline. And so as a team leader, what I would do is I would address with the team what the issue is, and I would work with them to fix it. Amber which is I guess yellow in the red light, green light system. That would be an area where they're kind of in danger of missing the deadline. That's kind of the, I guess, wake-up call where you say, hey, you got to pick up the pace, you're not working fast enough, or hey, I see some errors coming about, you might want to fix those before you really dive into it. And then green means you're in perfect status, you're going the right way, you're headed the right direction, and you're on time. Phase 7 is the quality control component. Now this is one of the biggest components of a professional services agreement. Whenever someone builds a building, they have to have an inspector come in and check to make sure the water's working correctly, the right number of lights are in, it meets city regulations. We also, as a professional services company, have to do that with our work. And so for my process, I thought that the team leader should do it at first. Then we should have an independent entity that does not work for our company to see what we're doing, how we're doing it, and is it done the correct way. And so the independent part would come in from experts who do not work for us. We'd have to pay for them and hire them, and this would be stipulated in the contract budget. But we would say, hey, you're an expert on merger and acquisitions. Can you make sure this merger and acquisition that we did with Southwest is done correctly? And they'd say yes, and they'd stamp their approval on it. Similar to the tax filing process, we'd have maybe an accountant that we hire and say, hey, do we file these taxes correctly and according to Malaysian law? Then he'd look at it and say perfect, or he'd say, maybe you need to go back and look at that. And this would all be done before we send this, our final work or our final product, I guess, to the board of Southwest Airlines. And then the final phase would be to, after Southwest Airlines says, your work was great, we love it, we ask them, well, can we do any more work for you? Do you have any clients that can request our service? This is kind of the final, I guess, feedback of it. And this is a way for, as a company, for us to build more contacts like I was kind of forced to do throughout this year. And so throughout everything that I've learned, I can really sum it up in one quote. And this quote really puts me in the mindset of how I was before I entered this year with ISM 2. The successful man is the one who had the chance and took it. And that's said by Roger Babson. This quote really spoke to me and really made me see that with ISM and with even learning global finance, I am taking a huge chance. The chance was there for me to learn something new and to learn a valuable skill in our world economy, and I decided to take that chance. So ladies and gentlemen, I am very thankful today to have this opportunity to speak with you. I am proud to announce that in the fall, I will be attending Rhodes College and studying political economy. This year has gone by very fast, and I have learned so much throughout my ISM journey, and I hope that you all have learned as much as I have learned this year. Do you guys have any questions? Okay, thank you.